Let's go. Okay, so Cavs win 125-120 in a real stressful game 5 in Cleveland. Let's talk about it real quick. First quarter, Toronto, they jumped out to an early lead, and it looked like they just took right off of where they were last game in game 4, and it was just a complete opposite game from Toronto in the beginning there. In game 4, everyone was struggling to hit any type of shot. It just came down to who was the more physical team, and it was Toronto, and Toronto ended up winning that game, obviously. And, that was just, obviously, if you've seen my instant reaction to game 4, you could tell how, frustrated I was that, the Cavs are kind of built to be this bigger team matchup-wise against Toronto, and yet we are getting, physically dominated, and Toronto is going after a guy who was the former defensive player of the year in Evan Mobley and succeeding in that matchup against Evan Mobley offensively for Toronto. And it just infuriated me that the Cavs just, for whatever reason, could not make a stop when they really needed it. And they could not make a shot when they really needed it. So that was frustrating, about game 4, but it just kind of felt like Toronto kind of took up where they left off, really. Just a lot more scoring. And it was kind of the same thing, Toronto would take a lead, the Cavs kind of clawed back. Toronto would take a lead, the Cavs clawed back, maybe even take a lead themselves, and Toronto would get it right back, a few minutes later. But it just kind of felt like, especially in the first half, the Cavs they were just playing from behind a lot. And, that's not something you want to see if you're a Cavs fan. This is a team that you should be better than. I picked the Cavs to win in 5 games, and that did not happen. We are either going to end this series in 6 games, or we're going to all the way to 7 games, depending on what happens in a few days north of the border. But, this game was real stressful if you were a Cavs fan, and I don't know how Toronto fans feel right now, but that's not my reaction. That's not my fan base. So yeah, the halftime Cavs do make a buzzer beater at the end of the first quarter, kept it close. We're actually led at the end of the first quarter 34-38. So, Toronto started off hot, kind of slowed down a little bit, and then Cleveland was able to claw back and eventually take the lead at the end of the first. And then Toronto really took off in the second quarter. I believe it was 75 points total for halftime. 74 points at halftime. They scored 40 in the second to Cleveland's 29. Their second lowest besides the fourth quarter for the Cavs. The Cavs scored 25 in the fourth quarter. But, that had me worried. The Cavs are supposed to be this defensive team, and they were giving up 74 points in one half. I can go back and look at the final score because I don't remember it off the top of my head here. But, 74 points the Raptors scored at halftime. The Raptors in Game 4 total scored 89. Sorry, that was the Cavs. Raptors scored 93 points total in Game 4. And the Cavs gave up 74 points in one half in Game 5 at home. From that, I was like, oh, we're in trouble. And it felt like that, It felt like the Cavs were just kind of not realizing that, not the season was technically not on the line in this game. But if you go down 3-2 at home in a series where the home team hasn't lost a game yet, and it kind of feels like whoever loses that first, well, obviously whoever loses the first home game of the series will lose the series. Either it's going to happen in Game 6 or it's going to happen in Game 7. It might not even happen at all, and the Cavs move on in 7 games. But, for the Cavs, that's probably the second worst case scenario. Of course, Toronto winning in Game 7 is the worst case scenario for the Cavs. But that is second. The second worst case scenario is the Toronto drags this thing back to Cleveland, and anything can happen. I saw a graphic that the Cavs were, I think, 10-1 in their last 11 series, where they have led 3-2 in a series. They're 10-1. And the Toronto Raptors are winless when they are down 3-2 in a playoff series. Cavs continue to not lose to the Toronto Raptors in their history in the playoffs at home, which is a very good sign for, of course, if Game 7 is a necessary thing in this series. But that's history for a reason. This isn't, we're not playing all-time teams here. And LeBron's not on this team for Cleveland. I don't even think anybody from Toronto's 2019 team is still on this Toronto Raptors team right now. But, the thing that concerns me if this game goes to 7 is not the history for the Cavs. That I could care less about the history. Do you have a championship ring? If so, when was it? How far along was that? And, do you still have experience, and do you still learn stuff from that experience? Of course, none of these prominent guys on this Cavs team has won a ring or even gotten past except for James Harden, of course, but the majority of the foundation of the Cavs, most of them have not gotten past the second round or even the Eastern Conference Finals. And, that concerns me, obviously, but the Cavs can say that they are experienced in the first round. Of course, we had the similar type of series like this against the Orlando Magic a few years ago, where Orlando took the Cavs to 7 games and the Cavs won in 7 games, where it was a series where every single game the home team won, and the Cavs moved on and ended up losing to Boston in the second round. And, you can kind of credit that to a little bit of injuries and wear and tear. And what's interesting now is that that's kind of the opposite of the Cavs are the more healthier team right now in this round. It feels like the longer this series goes on, the worse it's going to be for the Raptors in the future if the Raptors can get by the Cavs. If the Cavs can beat the Raptors and stay healthy, that's a really good sign. Obviously, this series has gone a little bit longer than the Cavs would like it, but regardless that the Cavs are the more healthier team right now. Scotty Barnes went down with a injury today. So did Scotty Barnes didn't go down with an injury. He played through it, but you can definitely tell that he was not feeling right there, especially in the second half. And, Brandon Ingram, only 11 minutes and 1 point. He left the game at least at some point. I think in the first half, might have been early second half at that point. Of course, they are also dealing with other injuries, with their point guard, whose name escapes me right now. This is going to bug me. That's going to bug me. I'll come back to that. But, that does, it certainly sucks for the Raptors, but injuries are a part of the game. When Boston was beating Cleveland, I never heard anything about on Boston's sides where they were like, oh, I feel bad that the Cavs aren't 100% here. Or the Indiana Pacers, when the Cavs were dealing with their injuries. You never heard any Pacers fans saying that they wanted to beat the Cavs 100% at 100%. No, they said that they wanted to beat the Cavs and move on to the next round, and that's exactly what they did. And, if you're the Cavs, you got to take this opportunity. This has got to be something that you need to take care of, especially in Game 6. I know it's going to be a hostile environment. That crowd is going to be even more of a factor than it has been in Game 2 or in Game 3 and Game 4. And, that's going to be an issue. And the Cavs have got to get over that. And if you're going to make a run, you have to win at least one road game in these playoffs. And if you don't, you're not going to make it very far. The Cavs can't rely on home court advantage all the time here. They relied that. We'll go back to the year that they lost to Boston. They, of course, were undefeated at home, but that was only through the first round. They lose pretty convincingly in Game 1 to Boston. They actually escape with a win in Game 2 against Boston, and they came back, and Boston just controlled the series from then on and ended up winning that game in, I think, 5, maybe 6 games that year, and then, of course, winning the NBA championship that year. But, that's an issue for the Cavs. You got to be able to win road games, and you can't always count on your home court being a guaranteed win, especially when you're going to go up against Boston or, Orlando, who is, controlling that series against Detroit, or if Detroit comes back, Detroit. You can't always rely on that because you're not going to have home court advantage if Detroit moves on. You're not going to have home court advantage if you meet Boston in the conference finals. You're just not. And you're probably not going to have home court advantage, probably regardless of who you play in the West, if you make it to the NBA finals. There's OKC, who's obviously got the 1 seed. I believe they were the best team in the NBA. You have San Antonio. They were the 2nd seed, second best team in the NBA in the regular season. Those two look like they're going to be on a collision course for the conference finals. I love that matchup, by the way. As a pure basketball fan, that's going to be a really exciting matchup to watch, especially in the Eastern Conference Finals, where both of those environments in OKC and in San Antonio are going to be really electric. And that's why I love playoff sports. And, that's just something that the Cavs are going to have to get over. And I hope they can do that in a few days against Toronto. It's going to be one of the more hostile environments that you're going to play in for the rest of the season, most likely. Boston's always going to be there. Detroit, if they get by, is always going to be there. I don't fear Orlando as much as I fear Boston or even New York to a lesser degree. I definitely think Boston is in a tier of their own when it comes to bad matchups for the Cavs. And everybody else, I feel pretty 50, at the very least 50-50 about, the Cavs' ability to beat them in a 7-game series. Detroit, I feel very confident that the Cavs can beat them in a 7-game series in the playoffs. New York, that's probably more 50-50, 60-40 for me, but I would still favor the Cavs in that series. And then Boston, it's probably a 70-30, maybe even 80-20 that the Cavs lose that series. I just don't see them beating Boston 4 times. They got to get lucky, and somebody's got to beat them. New York is struggling with Atlanta right now. Boston is well on their way. If they have not advanced already, they're well on their way to advancing to the second round. And, it's either going to be Atlanta, not most likely happening with the Knicks taking a 3-2 series lead there. So it's more likely going to be Boston and New York. And, that'll be a really cool series. I know those two teams have kind of built in a rivalry with, New York and Boston always being a pretty good rivalry, just city versus city. Add a playoff contention series. It's going to be a really good series to watch. But with that being said, if you're looking at that series from a Cavs perspective, you want that series to go to 7 games. You want those guys to be physical. You want those guys to get banged up. And regardless who wins, you're going to be wanting to probably take out either, if you win. Of course, you got to beat Toronto. You cannot overlook Toronto. I feel like the Cavs have kind of shot themselves in their own foot by kind of overlooking Toronto. But if the Cavs can get past Toronto, either in Game 6 or back home in Cleveland in Game 7, and they can get by either Orlando or, Detroit, depending on who comes out of that series. Right now, Orlando has the lead in that series, but Detroit did just win yesterday. So we will see. Or no, they won today. They won earlier. So, yeah. So Detroit and Orlando are going back to Orlando with the Magic having a 3-2 series lead. But Detroit is the number 1 seed for a reason. You can argue whether they are overrated or not. They're still there for a reason. So let me get back to this game because I just went on a huge rant, and I apologize. But at the end of halftime, Toronto with 70 plus points at the end of halftime, and then the Cavs kind of gotten. It doesn't show very much about how they struggled, especially in like the mid to end of the third quarter. Cavs got off to a really strong start in the third quarter. Believe went on to like a 10 or 8-0 run at the beginning of the third quarter. And then Toronto settled in. They took a lead, and, they brought it back. Let's just say that. They brought it back, and it kind of looked like the Cavs were like, we're a little, like, they looked shell-shocked at the end of that third quarter. And then, for whatever reason, Toronto went cold. And maybe it was the injuries finally catching up to them, and, them not really having a guy that you can really go to at 100% at least, with Barnes being hurt, Brandon Ingram being out at this point. He did not return. We'll see what his status for Game 6 is. I imagine that he is going to play if he can, basically function at a basic level. He's probably going to play. It's for Toronto season. It's the playoffs. We'll see. We'll see, though. Barnes is probably going to play. We'll see what his health status is for Game 6. But, if I'm the Cavs and you smell blood in the water, you got to go get them. You got to go do it. Regardless if it's in Toronto or not, you got to go do it. Because if you allow the Toronto Raptors, with all their injuries and all their, mistakes that they've made, because this is still a young team that, is pretty new to this playoff experience. They haven't been to the playoffs in a couple of years. And, the young core of this team has not had an environment like this. They haven't had the pressure like this. And the Cavs have. And they know the sting of losing. Toronto doesn't yet. And I think Toronto is probably a year or two away before they are really a top contending team. And honestly, I think the Cavs and the Raptors are kind of on opposite sides of the spectrum here. The Cavs are in win now mode. Their chances are only going to get worse for winning this championship. The longer this goes on, the more chance that the Cavs do not win this championship with this core. But Toronto is on the basic end, or the opposite side of that, where their chances are only going to get better with more experience like this. So this series is already a win for Toronto. As a season, it's probably already a success. Obviously, fans want an NBA championship in Toronto once again. While that would be cool, I do not want that to happen at the Cavs' expense. So, The Toronto Raptors just went cold in this fourth quarter. The Cavs, with Dennis Schroeder, really got going, and I was waiting for him to actually have a decent playoff game, and it finally happened. That was a huge help for the Cavs. They were getting him going on pick and rolls, and then he was just driving into the lane. He missed a couple of shots there, but they were contested shots. The Raptors probably got away with a few fouls, but Schroeder made them pay and made those shots when he needed to. Mobley hit like 2 or 3 threes. Let me check here. He was 3 for 3 from the 3-point line, and that really flipped the switch here when he hit that first three. I don't think the Raptors were really expecting Toronto, or the Toronto Raptors, I don't think we're really expecting Evan Mobley to hit a three, let alone make it. So he made them pay, and that's going to be an adjustment Toronto's going to have to make, which is going to open somebody else to make a play. Donovan Mitchell, his plus-minus still not great. He was a -9 today. Still only had 19 points in 31 minutes. Not his best game. I'm expecting him to kind of take over one of these games, maybe. We'll see. I think Toronto has kind of figured him out defensively. But, that's going to be his job to make adjustments according to that. And he's done it before. We've seen it, and it's only going to be a matter of time before he breaks out and eventually has another Donovan Mitchell type playoff game where, he's just saying, give me the ball and get out of the way. Now, Toronto did something that I don't know if they've done it all series and I just haven't noticed, but when Donovan has the ball at the top of the key and he's just doing, his ball handling thing and maybe setting up a play or doing whatever, Toronto always has, a guy on Mitchell, and then they bring up another guy with, let's say it's Donovan Mitchell and Max Strus on the floor. Strus is always, to the left or the right of him, and they always kind of bring up Donovan Mitchell's or Max Strus's guy to kind of double, like a little double team on Donovan Mitchell and try and get him to get rid of the ball. And it's worked, and sometimes it works and then Toronto forces a turnover because Donovan's trying to do too much, or Donovan splits them and gets to the hole. And I think he did that a couple times. He missed those shots, I believe. He might have made one or two, but I wonder what's going to happen and what adjustments they're going to make if Toronto continues to do that. Again, I don't know if I'm not sure if they've been doing that all series, but I did notice that they did that a lot in this game especially. So I wonder what Donovan Mitchell is going to do in terms of adjustments with that. If he's going to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker and then maybe get a give and go and, cut to the hole, and maybe he gets something there. And that also could open up somebody else, to make a shot. Dean Wade had a pretty good game. I don't really want, he was 1 for 6 from 3. I don't want him shooting 6 threes in a game, let alone, 10 shots. He had 7 points in 21 minutes. Did okay. Had a couple of rebounds, had a steal. So not too bad. I just don't know if I want him necessarily taking as many shots as he did today. But if he's going to make those shots, by all means do it. He just didn't do that today. I think this is more of a Dean Wade type game, and this is more of his normal. But, in terms of, shots, not in terms of makes, we know Dean Wade can catch on fire. It's just about the floor and the ceiling and where he actually is. You know what I mean? So we'll see what happens with Dean Wade, especially in these next 1, maybe 2 games here in this series. Thomas Bryant, he came in, didn't score at all, was a -1, but also was pretty effective and giving Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley a little bit of a break when they needed it. Only played 5 minutes, so, good for him to get into this game. He didn't make any mistakes. He wasn't a liability by any means, so pretty good on him. Dennis Schroeder, I already talked about him. Sam Merrill had 9 points in 23 minutes. Not bad. Waiting for him to kind of, same thing with Donovan Mitchell, kind of waiting for him to kind of catch fire. Maybe I would swap Sam Merrill's shots for Dean Wade's shots. Sam Merrill was only 2 of 3 from the field, and Dean Wade was 3 of 10. So if I had it in a perfect world, I would switch Dean Wade shots for Sam Merrill shots. That's not necessarily the makes and misses, but the attempts I would try and switch around for the Cavs, because we know Sam Merrill, when he gets hot, he can end a game like that. And, if we can have a guy like that with Donovan Mitchell maybe off the bench or not having to handle the ball as much, which really killed us last year, especially against Indiana, when everyone was like, all right, Donovan's going to get his points, but he's going to gas out eventually, and that's when we take advantage. And that's exactly what Indiana did last year, and it's, it was a successful strategy. They obviously won the series and went on to push the Oklahoma City Thunder all the way to 7 games. And, if Sam Merrill can get hot, especially later in these series, if the Cavs can move on against going on against, either Detroit or Orlando, if Sam Merrill is going to be a key in both of those series, in either of those series in the next round, and, we're going to need him. Jordan Tyson, why I said that's the second game I've said that. I'm sorry. Jalen Tyson had an okay game, 8 points on 13 minutes. This is more of what a Jalen Tyson game should be. Definitely not going to be, the Jalen Tyson that we've seen early in the season before the James Harden trade. I think that spot has kind of been filled by James in terms of, Tyson's ability to just kind of hold the ball and kind of play his style of game. Now he's getting used to the fact that either if Donovan Mitchell's not on the floor, then James Harden's going to be on the floor, and he's going to want the ball in his hands more often than Jalen. And, if Harden and Mitchell are somehow not on the court together, then it's going to be Merrill's job. And, he's just going to be a secondary guy, and he's got to get a little used to that. He did an okay game. He wasn't a complete ghost by any means, but he did okay. Not a bad, I'm not mad at Jalen Tyson at all. Jared Allen, although he did not do as well in the scoring department, only 9 points in 25 minutes, he had a couple of huge blocks and huge defensive stands on the other end of the floor that really helped the Cavs kind of, keep that momentum going. Had a few blocks that went out of bounds, but then it resulted in shot clock violations for the Toronto Raptors. He had a pretty good game in the defensive side. Not so much offensively, only 9 points again, but 3 rebounds and 3 blocks today. Did have 3 turnovers, which is not something you want to see from Jared Allen. I will say this again. I hate the Cavs. When the Cavs are doing these stupid long passes, it makes me so mad because all they're doing is just giving Toronto these easy lanes and fast break opportunities just to score points. And, if you're going to do that in Toronto, that's going to be momentum breakers for you, especially when the crowd isn't going to be on your side. It's a lot easier to flip momentum when you're at home versus on the road. You can't make simple mistakes like that. And it didn't come back to bite them this game, but it came back to bite them last game. And, or the game before, not this game, but the game before. In game 4 that came back to bite the Cavs, and obviously they lost, and that was one of the main reasons for that. Evan Mobley, okay, like I said, he did kind of ice the game with those threes, and him and Dennis Schroeder both kind of iced the game for the Cavs, and that ending was a little more complicated than it really needed to be, with Mobley missing both of those. Or was it Harden? I think it might have been Harden that missed both those free throws. Somebody went 0 of 2 at the very last few seconds of the game. I think the game was pretty much already in hand, obviously, because the Cavs won, and Toronto didn't score another point after that, I don't believe. So game was already technically in hand, but it made it a lot more stressful that somebody went 0 for 2. I believe that was James Harden. It might have been Evan Mobley though. Speaking of James Harden, 23 points on 40 minutes, 7 from 13 from the field, 4 of 8 from 3. He's gonna make me nervous. We all know the history of James Harden in elimination games, and that's going to make me nervous, and it should make every Cavs fan nervous. But if he can get over that, watch out for this Cleveland team. James Harden is playing for not a legacy. This isn't a legacy series. This isn't anything. He is playing for his reputation alone in these playoffs. If James Harden is the same old James Harden that we've seen in every other team that he's been on, and every elimination game that he's been in, it's going to be, once again, LOL, it's James Harden, he chokes, he can't win the big one. If he can maybe put away this Toronto Raptors team next in Game 6 in Canada, once again, I gave him so much crap for basically being a ghost in Toronto, because I will tell you this, James, if somehow you are listening, Toronto's going to do the exact same thing that they did to you in Game 4. Every time you touch the ball, you are going to get booed. And it is up to you to make those clock it and make them pay and get them quiet and win us this series. That's your job if you're James Harden. You cannot let that crowd get to you, because I could tell that it got to you in Game 4. And as a veteran, that should not be happening to you. You can't make those passes that you made. You can't make the defensive lapses. That's going to happen in every game. I get it. But it was happening to a lot more than it really should have been in Game 4 in Toronto. And like I said, it's a lot easier to flip momentum, and it's a lot harder. It's a lot easier to keep momentum if you're a home team, and it's a lot harder to flip momentum if you're a road team, especially in a hostile environment, especially in a playoff series, where it is now do or die for the team that you are playing. And right now, if you lose this game in Toronto, it's do or die for you too. And everyone's going to be it's going to be a microscope around you, and it's going to be a microscope around Donovan Mitchell. And it's up to you guys to break that narrative. And, it's not going to be just this one game. It's not going to be, the Cavs beat the Raptors in, let's say, 6 games in Toronto. James Harden is no longer a playoff choker. It's not going to be in one game. You have to continuously do it and then go on and make a huge run in these playoffs for us to finally give you the respect that you probably deserve, but you have not earned. So that is my final message for today. Thank you guys if you made it all this way through, and I will see you when I see ya for Game 6 of this series. Man, this is taking a lot out of me.